podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead Podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I very much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Peace. This is the Ask Your Oldhead Podcast with Justice Rajee. I'm joined by my guest today, Stephen Green. Peace, Stephen.
How we doing, sir? Happy to be here today.
Oh, man, we're doing pretty good, fairly well. Yeah, I guess better than pretty good. I think most of us doing great, actually.
Things can always be worse.
Yes, given the current circumstances and conditions of the world, I think we're feeling good about all these things where we're at.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So we just ride into it. Anyone that you want to give some reverence, love, respect for as we get started?
I'm a big family guy. So, I'm a son of a Puerto Rican mom and a Detroit raised father, African American, and the two most influential people in my life. And then happily married to my best friend of the last 20 years, my wife Kirsten. So, I think those three people have had the most pivotal impact on me in becoming the man I am today.
All right. Thank you. Props to them. We'll get to where I always start. So can you just share, Stephen, a principle, or a standard, something that you try to practice or do as you move through the world?
Yeah, I'm the youngest of 5 boys, and I've always been really big for my age. And one thing that my dad instilled in me as a young man was that anyone who's older than you, you refer to them as sir or ma'am until they tell you otherwise. Mm. And as a kid, I always thought that was out of reverence and respect. And I came to learn that, yeah, part of it was that, but also it puts people at ease. And, I was 6 feet tall and almost 200 pounds by the time I was 12. And so, growing up in Portland, Detroit, I had to be good at putting people at ease. And so that's always been a good way to do it. So it's something I continue to practice and share with my kids as well.
Mm. What is some of the, because, we're in the Pacific Northwest, and I would say even in the Midwest where you have a large contingent of folks who either have Southern roots or, maybe have military backgrounds. What are some of the responses you get though when you give people the sir or the madam? Like, are they really positive, or are they a little bit frozen? Like, what's some of the responses?
I would say 80% of it's probably really, really positive, and people are taken back by it. 15% kind of just look at me questioning, like, why'd you do that? And then there's definitely a 5% are kind of aghast and very quickly correct me and say, the general response is my father or my mom was ma'am or sir. I'm just such and such. All right, cool. Yeah. Now I know.
Right.
And so, my dad's advice has definitely held true. People tell me otherwise, and then I follow accordingly.
Yeah. That's dope. I think something interesting there that you shared I wanted to ask more about with, sort of your folks and your father specifically preparing you to engage how others will engage you, not necessarily just like how you see yourself.
Yeah.
I wanted to tease that out. Is there any, like, do you give the same? Do you add something on when you share it with your kids in these days and times? Like, how do you? Have you added on to the secret sauce there?
Yeah. Both my parents they grew up in different times and different parts of the country and the world. My mom's from Puerto Rico, and before moving here as a family, she'd only lived in San Francisco and New York City. Two of the biggest cities in the world. And then my father, born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, on the east side of Detroit. Shout out to D. But my grandparents are from a very small town in Alabama. They got married when they were 16 and 14. And I think, the way my grandparents raised my father really painted the way that he viewed things. And, Detroit to this day is still the most segregated city in the country.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
I think that painted the way that he was able to engage in relationships. And I think I'm the youngest of 5 boys. And I think for us, he realized, growing up in Detroit had a lot of great positives. But Detroit wasn't the a really great example for the rest of the country. And so even as he moved west and settled in San Francisco before he met my mom, it was a culture shock for him. And San Francisco is a very diverse cultural city. And I think one of the things he wanted for us to be able to do was navigate any room that we walk into. And he knew East Detroit wasn't any room, but also as a kid growing up on the west side of Portland, also wasn't any room as well. And so I think he figured if we could navigate the streets of East Detroit, but also Beaverton in the 80s and 90s, anywhere else we go would be somewhere in the middle. And so I think he prepared us appropriately. And then for my kids now, I think much of the foundational things, stay true, treat people with respect elders, treat people how you want to be treated. But it doesn't come from a place of fear at all. My dad had some rough spots in Detroit and also going to the South, and where your actions could get you hurt or killed. And that's a different environment for our kids today. Except when you're talking about interactions with police.
Indeed.
And so my dad always told us, the main priority is come home. Do whatever you have to do to come home. And any and all interactions, let that be your guide. And I think that's good advice for my kids today. Whatever you have to do to get home.
Indeed. Moving. Relationships, broadly defined. Is there something that you understand now at your current place in life that maybe you didn't understand as well as a younger man?
Yeah, I think I've got a lot of my mom's spicy Puerto Rican personality. I can be petty at times, and I think as I've gotten older, it's important to distinguish what someone did versus who they are, and not to confuse the two. And so as I've become an adult and a little older, and continue to work on this too today, understand that how someone treats me in a moment or what someone did in a moment in time does not make who they are. And to distinguish between those things and give people grace, and be clear when I am talking to someone, talk to them about what they did and not who they are. Because those are two very different conversations.
Yeah, that's an interesting piece because I think, especially in our current, I guess you could say, conversation media space where you can get a lot of instances of what people did, in a sense, from
right.
from they said this in this tweet when they were 12 or 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or they once were a part of this other thing that was, this or this happened. What are some of the ways that is there any particular way that you kind of keep yourself in that space, being able to, maybe give that moment of grace? Is there something that you do? Is there a breathing technique, or I don't know, what's sort of do you have a trick or a piece of advice of someone how to stay in that space as opposed to maybe jumping off the bridge, so to speak?
I try and always be present. I pride myself on being a really good listener, I believe, and hearing people, and being present in the moment, and not just listening to, confirm the point that I already had in my head, or to get ready to say what I'm going to say, but really, 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 practicing and concentrating on being present in a moment, and
Hmm.
letting that moment dictate, my response, as opposed to saying, well, these three other times in the past, I've perceived you doing this. So, you know, I'm going to have that jade this interaction that we're having together. And so I think the best piece of advice is just, focus on being present, and understanding what that means for you.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I know I find myself sometimes, where something happens in the public space, and I'm trying not to maybe match other folks' intensity or how
Mm,
they feel at the
right,
moment when, like, oh,
right,
did you see what they
right.
what they did? And I'm like, um well, tell me more about what happened
Yeah,
before I decide if I want to, like, invest in it, so to speak, emotionally. And I don't, every topic or issue, it's not easy to do that,
yeah,
depending on how close it is. I'm sure you could agree. Um, Man, is there with that, how do you, any ways that you particularly try to work on that, or make opportunities with with your kids or family, or even in, because you move in a lot of professional spaces where folks are
yeah.
asking you for advice, and I think that's a useful thing to understand in business or work matters. Is there any particular ways you try to help people hear that particular message, maybe when you're asked or inquired or what have
Mm, I think part of it just stems from really knowing yourself, and knowing what deficiencies or weaknesses you have. And I think, knowing myself, I'm a verbal thinker.
you? Hmm.
And so I tend to be someone that, you and I may start at point A on a topic, and maybe we disagree, but I'll throw out my angles on it to you over 10 minutes, and you throw out yours, and maybe by the time we get to 10, 20 minutes later, I may be on your side.
Hmm.
But I tend to be somebody that verbally talks that out, and I know I have to be mindful that not everyone works that way. And so part of what I work on is knowing that when I come into a situation, I'm ready to talk about it. I'm ready to put things out on the table.
Hmm.
But other folks, maybe they need to ruminate on things more by themselves for a period of time. And I've got to be okay with that. I've got to be
Yeah.
okay with being like, hey, I'm ready to go. And they're like, no, I'm gonna sleep on this for the night, and then come back to you and kind of give you my thoughts.
Yeah.
And I think a younger version of me would have been like, wait, what? Um,
Sleep.
yeah,
There's no
think
sleeping.
think about it. Like, just tell me where you at. Tell me where you at.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big piece of this, is like knowing your natural tendencies,
Hmm.
and understanding those, and not seeing those as necessarily a weakness, but also understanding that not everyone is built the same way as you. It was interesting this weekend. A lot of people were talking about Joe Biden's comments,
Hmm.
on the Breakfast Club show,
Yeah.
and people came out on it a bunch of different ways. And after I was thinking about it for a little bit, I don't know if him going and handling that situation and not saying anything, like he should have not said anything, does that make him any more presidential? Does that mean that he's going to advocate and center the experiences for Black folks,
Hmm.
any better than had he said something? And so to me, it's kind of not the point of whether he said something or didn't say something, but more of what should be talked about is, all right, what are the things that we know he's going to be doing that are going to change our lot in life, and
Hmm.
close the wealth gap, and really center our experiences, as opposed to, does he just know how to culturally respond and navigate the world without ever really advocating for us. And
Hmm.
it makes me
Yeah.
think that just because somebody doesn't call you the N word doesn't mean they want to see you shine, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we have to understand that and know that just because someone handled the situation appropriately and they let you into the room, that doesn't mean they want to see you shine.
Yeah.
And I want leaders that want to see us shine and that understand that a rising tide doesn't lift all boats.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that was actually my the one. It was funny when that happened. When it was happening, I had a ton of like work that I was doing all
Right.
day, and then like I was like, oh wow, that sounds like something crazy. I didn't actually like listen to what he did. Right,
Yeah,
I'm like
yeah,
monitoring. I'm sort of jumping on, in my little breaks of the day, and then I had I was actually recording some Friday night with some other with some other folks, and I was like, all right, well, I gotta get ready for that, so I really can't like dive into whatever went on here.
yeah,
Right. And so I,
yeah,
texted another friend. Like I knew enough of what happened. So I texted a friend and the friend was like, yeah, I was on a Twitter break today. So I don't know, what happened. I was like, oh, don't worry about it. It'll be there tomorrow if you want to be upset. You know what I'm saying? Like you can
yeah,
find it, enjoy your Twitter break. You know
yeah,
what I'm saying? Stay in your zone.
yeah,
And like I think you touched on something important about knowing yourself and knowing what things are like, what did I want this person to do?
right,
Right? How did I want them to behave? And then is that really up to me to decide? Like, is that really the interest that I have with some of the thoughts that came to my mind as
yeah,
you were sharing that? So, and I think it's like there's something to um being in tune, with what your bigger goal is. Like as you said about your pops saying, make it home. And
yeah, yeah,
if this is not going to help me make it home, I'm
yeah,
not going to dive down this lane of whatever that particular instance is. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
powerful. That's powerful. So right now,
Hmm.
in your world, what is just something that's really important to you right now? Like there's something that's like top of the steam list.
I think, and this is just, probably just a manifestation of me just getting older,
Hmm.
and going to funerals and seeing people with gray hair and that kind of thing. But time is really, the most important asset that I feel like, exists right now. And asking me today, that's time with my son.
Hmm.
I feel like my son's at a really pivotal time in his emergence as a human
Hmm.
being. And my wife and I have been talking about that a lot over the last week. And so time with him is the thing that's the top of mind right now. And I feel like one of the things that's a positive externality of COVID is I'm getting more opportunities than I would have otherwise, to
Mm.
interact with him and plant seeds in him and help him along his journey of growing to be the human being he's going to be in time. Um, and so I'm thankful for the time and the opportunity to be healthy enough to be part of that with him.
Mm.
And that's something that I have to play an active role in.
Yeah.
Just being here and just making sure there's food on the table, yada yada yada. That's not investing in him. And so for me it's investing that time with him and helping him navigate these tough waters.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's I feel like at this moment a lot of folks are learning, you know, kind of how, they orient to their children in like
Hmm.
in a different way. Without some of the other things that's like, oh, we gotta get to school, we gotta get to this, we gotta get
Right,
to that,
right,
we gotta
right,
move over
right,
here, we
right,
gotta move to
right,
this. And
right.
I think I've been reading a piece that's talking about, and it was a couple who was talking about I think they were like in Hawaii or someplace. And they're like, for their kids, this is like magical. Like everyone's together all day. They're taking walks. They're cooking food. They're like kind of staying in
Yeah,
the house.
yeah,
Being and then being concerned if they're getting a misrepresentation maybe about what life is. But then on the other hand, it's like also, well, how intentional are we when we need to be with like what's happening, with your children, and that time focus. I had, um, both my kids are a little older than yours, but
Yeah.
when my son was around, 12, 13, had to, a challenging moment where I had to reorganize some of our priorities to make sure he got more time, than
Right.
he was getting.
Right.
And even with the current 14-year-old, like this time, making
Mhm.
time intentional, even though we're all in the house, we were moving in the middle of all of this,
Yeah.
and you can still find yourself like leaving each other alone if you're like doing stuff that you got to do,
Right. Right.
So, all right, that's peace. Is there, with time and time usage, is there any tools or anything that you use to kind of monitor or figure out if you are spending enough time or something, or focusing on? Is there something that you like, a cue or something that you use?
Well, I have a 5'7" Q that lives with me. My wife, that is really helpful in queuing me up when that needs to be adjusted.
Or
Um, but also just this, having multiple kids. Like, our kids are all very, very different, and for
yeah.
our oldest, she seemed like she was a 30-year-old adult since she was like 8. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
um I have to understand that, all of our kids are going to be different, and I shouldn't take what happened with her and what worked with her and just say, oh well, it'll work with the other two as well, because that's just not the case. That's not
Yeah.
reality. um and I think the other realization is, like, it's not something that I disdain or I don't look forward to doing. Like, spending time with my son is a great opportunity for me as well. So, like, it's
Mm-hmm.
something I look forward to. um it's just something that I have to be intentional about,
Yeah.
and think about it from the standpoint of, what is he getting out of this, as opposed to, well, I did it and I checked it off the box. Like, we spent an hour together. And so, my wife and I had a long conversation about this actually last week at like 3 in the morning, lying in bed.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, like, I want to find out, like, what he's passionate about. What is that? Like, what's the thing that, what's his why? Like, what's the
Yeah.
thing that gets him out of bed? And, I realized that we hadn't really had that conversation. And maybe it's early, he's 11 years old. But to plant that seed and talk about, like, what do you dream about? That's
Yeah.
that's a really important thing. And, I'm really, really privileged to be able to have had my dad in my life for 42 years, and always lived with him and stuff as a young man. And, he was a really strong piece of my life, as well as both of my grandparents, my grandfathers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm looking forward to doing that for my son, as well. I know there's a ton of privilege with that,
Yeah.
but there's also a ton of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And like, I feel like kids are sponges, and they're always learning from us, whether we
Yeah.
know it or not. Um, and so I'm excited to take advantage of that opportunity, as tough as it is at times.
Yeah. Indeed, indeed, indeed. No, I definitely want to appreciate you for sharing that with us. I think that's the so for me was honoring your kids, who they're becoming.
Yeah.
Is something that is really it's important. What I mean, me and my mother talk about with certain stuff. I remember asking, I'm like, she always gave me a lot of trust, like to kind of do
Mm.
stuff. And I asked her, I'm like, Mom, why did you just let me do that? She's like, well, you seem to have good judgment. So I let you, I let you go, go your own way with some of these things. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. I was
Yeah.
like, well, a couple times in there I could lose a little more input, but that's cool. Like, I dig it.
Right.
Like, the
Right.
general theme was she saw that
Right.
she didn't, her assessment said I didn't need, attention around these couple of issues. Right. But there were
Yeah.
other things
Yeah.
where I definitely did need the attention. And, I think a lot of stress for young people, rises out of like how the people closest to them are responding, to their particular needs, maybe in derivation to like their siblings or the other like cousins or kids of similar age within the family. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Right.
I think that's powerful advice there and input. All right. So I'm gonna pivot us a little bit,
Yeah.
and ask. So you do, you do and have a great deal of experience with businesses and creative things. I wanted to know if we could talk a little bit about Pitch Black
Yeah.
and then maybe some other things related to that. How or where? What's Pitch Black looking like right now, given the the current situation?
You know, I haven't given Pitch Black for this year in Portland a bunch of thought as of yet. You know, we generally hold it August, September, October timeframe, and so I feel like we've got a little bit more time to look around the corner and see where we're going to be at come this fall. So no definitive decisions there made yet. I know it's got to happen in some way, shape, or form. I think it's become an important enough event in the community that it needs to continue to exist in whatever form it is, and I'm committed to that.
Yeah. So, for the listeners or those that don't know, Pitch Black is maybe you could tell better than I can. Like what?
I can give you
the quick rundown. I was about
I'll
to
give
do
you
with
a quick
Justice
rundown.
on.
So I started Pitch Black back in 2015. I'm an economist by training, and I love demographics. And some recent census data had come out in 2015 about the number of Black businesses in the state of Oregon. The state of Oregon was home to more than 5,000 Black businesses at that point in time, and I was shocked by it. I was appalled. I was like, wow, that's a lot more than I would have guessed. And at the same time, I also knew that Black businesses and Black founders were very disconnected from the dominant culture, mainstream startup ecosystem that I found myself being the only Black or brown person at many, many, many times. And that shaped everyone's perspectives. And so I think from the dominant culture perspective, they thought, well, we know Steven, so, you know,
we'll get Steven over.
That's like, that's like Black businesses. And then when you talk to Black business owners, it was like, well, I don't know if they really want to help me be successful. So we got to do this on our own. And I got to, just hustle in the shadows. And I thought there was an opportunity to bring these two communities together that I cared deeply about in my favorite city. And at the time, Shark Tank, the TV show, was pretty popular, and so I was thinking, what was something that I could do that could kind of leverage that. Some friends and I started a brew pub and brewery a few years before that, and so I had a space where we could hold the event. And so I just figured I'd get 10 founders to come tell their story to an audience of 30, 40 people. We'd have a good party, some connections would be made, and we'd be off. Little did I know, we had no sponsors. It was literally no budget for the event. Just used Twitter and some Canva slides. And I worked with the founders to help them with their presentations. And we had over 100 people show up the first time. It was trending on Twitter that day in Portland. And it was magic. It was magic. I don't know what to say other than, like, when you're in a moment and you're in a space where it's just magical. That was it. And it wasn't about the pitches or the money raise. It was about people in the same city finally being in the same room that have been in the same city all this time but have never been in the same room, and what could come from that.
And it's something I appreciate it about the event and enjoy. I mean, I enjoy hearing folks' businesses and what they're trying to do and how they're working on it. But it's also, I think there's always, I mean, we constantly have the conversation around, like, you can't be it if you don't see it, and those sorts of things, and across different disciplines and areas of skill. But I always, I worry that sometimes folks almost like you need to have the most complicated version of seeing it before you think it's legitimate, as opposed to, well, there's 100 people in there that all either have businesses or care about small businesses, and like 10 of them are going to present on their business, and then it's like, okay, this is a nucleus of people, right? This is a space where there's these people exist, and you didn't have to go that far to see it. And I always thought that was a cool part of about the Pitch Black specifically, but just the general reality, like, if you want to see something, come together and be together, or at least get more than you and your buddy, get to 10 people kicking it, talking about business.
I think for me, a lot of it stems from just, it comes back to perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're Black, white, or otherwise, if you perceive that there's not a lot of Black business owners, or you perceive that Black people only do business in Northeast Portland, or they only do, the triple B's, as I call them, barbecue, barbershops, and beauty supply, then that paints your decisions and where you're going to look for Black business owners, right?
Yeah.
And so I think for a lot of folks, prior to being, to going to Pitch Black or hearing about it, they would have never even posited the idea that a Black drone company might exist in Portland, a Black coffee shop. I mean, all these things that seem to go anti to these narratives and themes that somebody made up, but we all fall for along the way. And so, the hope of things like Pitch Black is to, not only have a great event where people come together, but, what are the conversations that are stimulated the following day? What is one of the people that came to the event, what are they talking to a coworker about the next day at the lunchroom? How are they articulating how they felt and what they saw and who they met? I think that's where the real work happens, and the real growth in the community and the ecosystems around the country that we've been able to do it really starts to happen. And the event is just plants the seed for those kind of things.
Yeah. And I think because there's something, at least in the current, I guess, atmosphere around like money, finance, and the wealth gap, and these things. There's like a conversation around like, people got to learn more about financial literacy. And then also people got to become entrepreneurs. And I worry that like the messages get muddled, right? So then like entrepreneurship is only something to do kind of like as this remedy to working somewhere, right? As opposed to like about the creation of a business. You know what I mean? Which are not the same thing to me. Like, you're like, I need side income. Like, well, that's cool. But that's that, like, so I wonder, like, is there any, with your background as an economist, and in the work that you've done in around business and finance and in service. So I'm sure I can say, in terms of serving in spaces where that expertise is needed in public activities. Is there something that you think we could do different in our conversation around like wealth and money literacy? Like,
I think part of it is normalizing conversations about it. I think we just don't have conversations in the Black community, particularly around money and wealth and how we're doing. I think that's a taboo topic. It's not something that comes up in the barbershop. No one's talking about 401ks or, dividend statements or K1s. I think people keep that close to the vest, and I think there's a lot of cultural reasons for that. And so I feel like it's not about getting people to become entrepreneurs. It's normalizing conversations around money and wealth and assets, and knowing the difference between things that depreciate and things that appreciate. And one of the things that really excites me is when I get to talk to female founders, Latinx founders, Black founders, and helping them understand. They may go into a conversation thinking they don't have the experience to be an entrepreneur, but after talking with me and hearing about, what are the core ingredients of a really great founder, those are the life experiences of Black people and brown people and women. Like they have to have grit and a fresh perspective and the ability to handle adversity, which are all the key ingredients of being an entrepreneur. And for Black people, especially Black people in Oregon, you have to do all those things just to get through life. And so it only makes sense to go and think about applying those to being an entrepreneur. And I think the gratification of being an entrepreneur doesn't really lie on the end of the balance sheet or the profit and loss statement, which I hope it gets there for folks. It's the value is in taking an idea that you had at your kitchen table and someone that doesn't know you from anything, spending their hard-earned money for that idea.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a game changer in my mind. Like, of course your grandma's going to love it. Of course your cousin and your uncle are going to tell it's a great idea. Your mama's going to lie to you about the sauce, whatever.
Baby, look at my baby socks.
Yeah, exactly. But that person in Salem who you're never going to meet, for them to go to a store or go on your website and buy your product and never interact with you, like that's it. And I think, I hope everyone has an opportunity to experience that fulfillment at some point in their lives, even if that's not their main thing that they do. I think there's such a value in, putting something out there to the world and having people respond, and give you affirmation of your idea and feedback to it and how it can be better over time. And I think we're a community that's already got great ingredients to be amazing entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And also at the end of the day, like the way to close the wealth gap is by owning things. It's not by increasing the income at our jobs, right? My dad always told us there's two kinds of people in this world: those who sign the front of the check and those who sign the back. The people that sign the front of the check, they own stuff, they own assets, they own real estate and stocks and bonds, and they understand, how those things appreciate and generate money over time. And I just think, again, at the end of the day, it's about helping people in our community make informed decisions. If people don't want to invest in stocks, great. That's fine.
Yeah.
But you should be armed with the information to make an informed decision, to do that. And so, I think me and a number of other folks would love to, find ways to normalize those kind of conversations so that they can happen.
Yeah. And I think that you touch on a very important piece there, because I think for most people, like in their family, there's like a conversation around money. It may often be like a scarcity conversation, like about how we're trying to manage stuff, like that inadvertent, intentional, but maybe not like focused talk. You know what I mean? Like, so, as I like to say, was fortunate. I grew up with, my mom and my grandmother. My father passed when I was really young. But we always had enough, right? But we would say we grew up broke. It was tight, like the line. Yeah. So you knew, if my mom gave us a 20, that was like, that's, make that $20 stretch, because that's your money to do something for yourself. But there's not going to be another 20 for 30 to 40 days. So find a way, and which is one conversation, right? So you learn how to find, like, as it pertains to money, you learn how to get stuff that you need or do something that you find is fun or whatever with little you got. But then also, things I learned as you age, you learn about, your risk tolerance, how much stuff you don't know about the way things work. And that's one of my big scares, I guess, around like money things, is that, like, the amount of times I'll get in a conversation with somebody about wealth or money, this or that, and it'll be like, it's not clear to me that they're comfortable being honest about how much they don't know about money.
Right.
And not that I know all these things, but I know I'm real comfortable when I don't know stuff going, I already know how that works. So, which prevents me from getting, kind of suckered in or something. Like, nah, look, brother, all you gotta do is give me this. I take the $100, then I do this with it, and this other thing happens, and then I'm gonna bring you back $120. And I'm like, that don't sound like something that works, man. Like, will you just be honest with me about how I'm going to become fabulously wealthy doing this? Is there, is there anything that you've seen or things that you've seen, your own work notwithstanding, or if there's a piece of things that you've done that has been really you think a successful tool means to have more conversations about like money and finance, things like
Yeah. So, I used to be a licensed financial advisor.
that.
I had my licenses with the SEC and stuff. So I feel like I can speak from an informed standpoint on this. And, the thing in doing that work and working with clients that always landed with me the hardest was, the biggest thing is just having a plan.
Mm,
Right. And so, some of my biggest clients that I had, they weren't people that made a bunch of money and they didn't come from money, but they were really good savers. And they
mhm,
understood the value of having a plan, and they didn't live outside of their means. Um, and so, one of the things that excites me about this conversation is to talk about wealth and money. You don't need to be a rich person, right?
mm, mhm,
Because a lot of what it takes is just about understanding what you do have,
mm,
saving the money that you do have, and understanding the difference between what you need and what you want. Things that appreciate and things that depreciate. And I think all the things you just talked about in your upbringing of having that $20 stretch, those are all great things that lead to someone being really, really successful with money. I just think culturally, we don't culturally have conversations around money, and we might actually be really good with money. We just haven't normalized, having conversations about it together as a group. And
mm,
so, the biggest part is having a plan. If you don't have a plan, it doesn't matter how much money you make. I think one of the things I saw with clients that I had was the habits that they had making $40,000 a year. Those habits didn't change making $400,000 a year.
yeah,
People find a way to live outside of their means if they don't have a plan and they've got bad habits.
yeah,
And I think it's a really bad assumption to assume someone who makes a lot of money is good with money, because I
yeah,
saw time and time and time again where that just was not the case at all.
yeah. Well, I think our our kind of cultural piece, I think, or at least something we share, I think, in mass, is the idea if something looks good, then it is good.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
All right.
it's very hard to fight the like. But I mean, but look at the car. I mean, it's rims. I mean, they always got nice outfits on, and they seem to be
Right.
happy. But it's like,
Right.
oh, it might
Yeah.
be, well, as we've learned in this last couple of weeks. Um, I wish I could find the tweet I was responding to. Some Surly Urbanist, Jamal had posted,
Uh-huh.
and I said, yeah, it's as if we are trying to cash flow the entire economy. Like, yeah, well, if we could just get to next Tuesday when the next set of
Yeah.
sales come in, and it's like maybe this is not the best economic model. That if
Right.
everyone's so close to the margin
Right.
that you can't take a break for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, or even the concept of uncertainty, which things are always uncertain in a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to get real
Yeah.
deep
Yeah.
philosophical, but
Totally. Totally.
but the idea that, like, I mean, it's been hard on a lot of businesses, I know. But the
Yep.
the idea that we have this break in action, and almost, large parts of what makes our things go are suddenly like, hey, we actually only have a 6-day runway,
Yep.
which is
Yep.
like,
And
wow.
from a business standpoint, I always tell folks, like, you don't pay for things with revenue, you don't pay for things with profit, you pay for things with cash. And so that's why, any banker will tell you cash is king. And, I think one of the things that we've learned with COVID is that, yes, that business down the street may have been doing $1 million a month in sales, but they were functioning on 0.5% margins, or in some cases negative margins. And they were just able to manage cash coming in and going out enough to where it allowed them to get by.
Mm,
Right. And so people make those assumptions because they think about the top line number, the revenue number, but they know nothing about cash. They know nothing about, the cost of goods sold. They know nothing about accounts receivable, accounts payable. And that really gets to, where your cash position is at any given time. And so I was not surprised to learn that, many restaurants and other businesses that were in the retail industry, they didn't have time for 1 or 2 months or 3 months. They had maybe 1 or 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just because of the way cash flow works.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Yeah, I think I tend to lean towards the idea that humans we find a way back to things or find a way to
Yep.
adjust to our circumstances. So
Yep.
I've stayed away from despair at the current circumstance of things.
Always gotta have hope. Always gotta have hope.
Yeah. No, I'm sure things will be different, and then I've tried to the best I can, pop up on some of my favorite places. Shout out to Dead Stock and do some business to make sure actually the coffee I was drinking this morning. But the reality, I think that we have the tools in our hands, and I think we'll see. Things always find another way to be. We're persistent.
They do, but we also at the same time have to understand in these conversations, especially around the Black community, that it's not true that a rising tide lifts all boats. And so it's important when we're talking to public officials and lending institutions that we say things like, okay, but what does that mean for Black folks? Not POC, not underserved communities, right. Black folks.
Black folks specifically.
Because when you look at the data, we're the ones that are always left behind, if not ever left in to begin with. And so it's important to have those facilitated conversations of with institutional partners and the systems that are in place, right? Like I'd love to say that we're going to have a point to where we can cancel capitalism, but that's not coming anytime soon. And so we're given this structure and this confines that we have to play within. So how can we make it work the best for us at any given time? And part of that is also just thinking big, right? I think far too often we settle for crumbs and the cake went right by us, right? And so what would it look like for us to focus on the cake? And to focus on, being able to walk in the front door and not the back door.
Yeah.
And all those other analogies. And I think that's the opportunity ahead of us in Oregon's Black community in particular.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on the special energy of thinking big, because I feel like when you're working on something, and it's okay if you're working on something that's a personal project, or you like the idea of it is not to be big, but it is that idea of like I just want this to be this size, and I don't want too much trouble, and I don't want it to be this way. And it's like, well, maybe if you think about it a little bigger, if you don't quite get to the bigger, you might actually get to the size that you like anyway. You know what I mean? Or I don't know, like a wise person once said to me about like sort of putting limits on what you can do, like self-imposed limits that may not have you feel like maybe you got them from externally, but you actually are creating that limit. And go ahead and swing for the fences, like jump out there and see what happens. Who means. So we went on down a long road of money. We were riding pretty high. I wanted to see if we could lighten the energy a little bit.
Yes, sir.
I know a good deal about you, I think, but I don't know the whole lot about you and some other things. Now I know you like your sneakers, and
I do like sneakers.
And
I got a couple pairs.
You got a couple pairs here and there.
Yeah.
What for you, just in the current set of things, what's something that just sneaker wise are you excited about, or in a general more I don't know, I guess for lack of a better word, on the consumer side of like, man, that'd be fun to have that. Anything on your radar that you're kind of checking for or looking out for?
I've always, as an adult, really thought of sneakers as nice to haves, but not gotta haves, and also from the standpoint of being a commodity and something that for certain pairs they definitely appreciate over time.
Yeah.
Just last week, a friend of mine here in Portland put up for auction a pair of shoes worn by Michael Jordan in a game, and they sold for $560,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's quite a bit more than he paid for them.
Yeah.
As you can imagine. And so this idea, again, this comes back to this idea that, things are frivolous when they're actually not. I've known people who bought cars with shoes before. Like I bought a car selling 2 pairs of shoes. And so, in COVID, I'm not just buying shoes willy-nilly. I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of a market of, all right, in tough times, people are going to be willing to let go of shoes for less than they normally would. And so I'm looking for, prices to drop on certain shoes that I know in the long term are going to be worth more money. And that similarly applies to stocks and bonds, right? So like if, buy low, sell high, like that's the whole idea of it. And with sneakers, that's something I know a little bit about. And so I know as we come into the summer months, there's going to be, a sale on sneakers that you'll be able to get at a discount, and as things normalize again, be able to sell at a premium. And so I think about sneakers from that standpoint. As far as ones that are coming up, there's not ones that I'm super excited about. I love the stories behind shoes. With working at Pencil, I know a lot of people that are shoe designers. And so, generally what gets me excited about shoes now is if there's a person behind the shoe that I know really well and I'm excited for with, a new release for them.
Yeah.
But most of the conversations that we're having around shoes right now is just that there's going to be a huge amount of supply coming online because stores have been closed, right?
Yeah.
And so, this is a global pandemic, but factories have been making shoes again now in Vietnam and China. And so the companies are knowing shoes are going to be coming in for the summer, but they haven't had a chance to sell the shoes from the spring. And so it'll be interesting to see what brands and stores do to get rid of inventory, because they're going to have fire sales just to make room for those shoes that are going to be coming in on boats over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I guess last night I was like, because I haven't, I'm not a big shopper in general of clothes, but I go in waves of, and so with us moving, I'm like, all right, I need, I got clothes I need to purge. So actually, behind the curtain, so to speak.
And everybody else. I have all my getting rid of shit. Yeah, getting rid of clothes.
You know what I'm saying? I gotta get rid of some of these clothes. Some of these clothes I've been holding on to, or they're worn out, or this or that. And then I was like, well, you know what? In about 3 weeks, some of these stores, some of these places, they're gonna have to do something. It's gonna be some sales. Like I might, because I have certain styles and things that I like. And I was like, well, let's just be patient. Wait a second, because I can't imagine for, at least for especially stuff that's more for I wear for, for look and for comfort, for style, for going out, for being, socially, whatever have you, versus like the sneakers I get for like that I walk and hike in, you know what I'm saying, which I get those really specifically so that my knees and feet don't hurt when I'm walking and hiking. And like the, I think there's even a piece in there around when we think about like financial or money or way things systems work, is like understanding like, if you got a whole spring line that someone invested time and energy into putting together, and they had an ad campaign, and then the world went on pause for 6 weeks to 2 months, something's got to happen with all that stuff. And so you might be able to cash out.
So this is one of the things I'm excited about with the money conversations, because it's not, talking about money and wealth is really about understanding principles and, ratios and patterns and things that exist and cycles that happen, that apply to a multitude of things. Right. And so some people may think about, oh, buying stocks is a really stuffy thing to do, but the principles that you learn in thinking about buying stocks can be applied to buying shoes, and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the analogies I always used to use when I was a financial advisor was talking about, how bad people are typically at buying stocks. And the analogy I would use is Nordstrom. And I would say, hey, Justice, Nordstrom stock is up 30%. And that's typically when people would say, oh, well, now's a great time to buy Nordstrom stock. But if I went and said, hey, Justice, Nordstrom's clothes are 30% more today, you would not most likely go and buy the clothes, right?
Right.
You would only buy them when they maybe are on sale, or like, hey, talk to me when they're on sale. But we don't apply that same kind of thinking when it comes to the stock price of a company. And so we miss out on the growth that could happen over time.
Yeah.
And so when you start thinking about stocks and investing, think about the brands that you know a lot about and that you think you're going to be poised to be in a good position next month, next year, the next 5 years, and then apply that lens of, okay, is that company on sale right now? Do you feel like you can get it at a good price to where the price has been over the last few years? And if you think you can, then great. Now's a good time to invest, but also understanding, okay, when do I plan on using that money? If that money is supposed to be used for my car payment next month, I shouldn't be buying stock today.
Right. With that money. I should hold on.
Money. That's a long-term usage of money or a long-term, investment of money for a short-term usage that's not a good match. And so I think, that's the exciting part of having conversations about money is we already have some guide rails and thoughts and strategies that we work with right now. And so I think there's the ability to kind of widen the breadth of those things and apply those same things to things that appreciate instead of things that depreciate.
Yeah.
Right.
Most definitely.
So,
yeah. And I think you touched on something that I've been nibbling around, or I don't nibble, maybe too soft a word. I've been really focused on is sort of, and even tying back to like having an event versus just talking about an event, or like when we want something to happen, getting the idea that I should get directly invested in that. As opposed to like theoretically get invested in that, and then even with decision making around money or objects, that like to look at yourself as a actor in how the world's going to play out. And so, like, yes, you need to have the at a distance symbolic conversation, and like, yeah, man, the people we need to the committee got to come together, and then you got to go. Am I going to any meetings of any kind? Do I have a finance meetup talk group, or do I have like some cousins or something, or family members or something? Like, where is your own place in it? And then when you get to like what you purchase or don't purchase, or where you shop, and those sorts of things, is like, do you have your focuses, and do you tap in? Something I saw you had early on when this was happening. I mean, you tweeted about like how people responded and looked out for the businesses that they care about, that are close to them. I think I'm paraphrasing a tweet, so I don't totally remember everything, but the general idea, like, people will recall if you showed up, for them in a very material way. And it's one of the places that I think is, we may overlook that's something we could do. It's like, no, you can, you can get in there with some of this stuff a little bit.
Yeah. And I think, what people, as we glamorize history and rewrite things, we forget about the secret sauce, right? Mm-hmm. And people ask me the secret sauce of Pitch Black and other things, and the secret sauce is really done beats perfect, right? And so whenever someone asks me for my advice on doing an event, I just say do it. Don't plan it to perfection. Do it, and do it from the standpoint of, what are the conversations you want to have happen the next day about that event? Have that be the litmus of success. Yeah. It's not about how many people come. It's about doing it. because, 1,000 other people may have the exact same idea, but they're not going to pull the trigger and they're not going to do it. And
Yeah.
so, the world is run by those who show up,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. Right. And if you've
Yeah.
got an idea that you're stewing on, that you're waiting to get it to a perfect spot, or waiting for that one pager, or waiting to be able to launch on Kickstarter or whatever, there's something that you can do this week to launch it. And that'll put you ahead of the game on 90% of other folks. I mean, how many times do you sit and watch something on TV that's a new idea or new business, and you're like, oh man, I had that idea 3 years ago, 5 years
Yep.
ago, 10 years ago, right? Everybody feels that way about things. It's just the person that you're reading about now, they pulled the trigger.
Yep.
And they more than likely didn't have the money or all the answers, but they decided on a certain day, like, hey, I'm gonna throw this out there into the world and see what the world thinks, and then pivot and iterate from there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm working with a couple people right now on something called Black Money Talks. And we're just going to throw something out there about, how do we normalize these conversations around money and wealth, and do it from a standpoint that's not bougie and is approachable, and really focuses on some fundamental things that we think are really important, and that's having a plan. It's not about being rich.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think, now for anyone who's listening, who's got an idea or is thinking about a business, like, do it. Just do it. Like,
Yeah.
that's the equalizer right there. That's the game changer. It's just going and doing it. And then, elicit feedback from folks that you're looking to support. Don't gas yourself up. Go and ask your customers, what'd you think of that event? What'd you think of that product? And listen to them when they give you feedback.
Right.
Rinse and repeat.
Man. Well, I think I think that's a good spot to head to, taking man. Thanks, Steven. I think I shared this with you in person. I want to say, and if I didn't, I'm gonna do it right now. I wanted to, last year at Pitch Black, I had decided not to, pitch about what I've been doing and some stuff. And I was like, oh, I was busy and this and that. And then I sat down, and within 2 minutes of sitting down, I was like, I should be down there pitching. What am I doing? I was like, I'm tripping. I was like, oh well, I'm gonna ride this out now. But it's the our own kind of perceptual filters and lens and other stuff that's going on with us can convince us to like not do stuff and not take certain actions. And I'd love to hear more about Black Money Talks and where you're going with that, and support in any way that I can, because I think it's really important, and also you tend to have good ideas, so I trust you. To move.
I know a little
forward.
something, but a little something. I mean,
Yes,
I think at the end of the day, my lane's definitely finance and business. It's definitely not the only lane in the world, but I'm a big believer in kind of staying in my lane. World peace is a really important thing. I don't know anything about world peace, so you're not going to hear me speak to that too much. But I think our community loves coming together, loves, sharing pheromones with one another. That's why I do the gathering. That's why it doesn't have any, programming pieces to it. It's just Black men getting together in Portland.
Yeah.
And because that's just what's needed. Right. And doing that consistently. And so, I'm a big believer in community and the power of what happens when you come together with other folks. And the nice thing about COVID is now we can do that and play with that in virtual ways. And I can talk to my homies in DC and Seattle and get them involved in some of the insights of what the things that are happening here in Portland. And I think that only helps us as a community to broaden our perspectives. I live in Northeast Portland in Woodlawn, and one of my neighbors, he's only ever lived in our neighborhood. Like, he's never lived anywhere else in the world except our neighborhood. And so the world to him is this neighborhood. And so, his perspective, as we've talked over the years, he's like, man, it's really hard to see the Black community disappear in Portland. And I was like, wow, like we have the biggest Black community we've ever had in Portland.
Yeah.
They're just not all required to live in your neighborhood
Anymore. Yeah.
But that's a perspective difference, because he's thinking on my street it was 80% Black and now it's 20% Black. Ergo, most of the Black folks in Portland are gone.
Yeah.
And so how do we leverage situations like this to grow those perspectives for folks and engage people in the needed conversations and hear their stories, and know kind of where we come from. And I think that's one of the things that always, kind of makes me smile is we all love the trailblazers here in Portland, but we don't want to be a trailblazer. And I always think about the fact that I meet somebody who feels like they're the first to do such and such, and it's always cool to know that somebody that looks like you was doing that before you, and they love finding that out. They love finding out, like I met a Black VC here in town a few years ago, and he's been investing in companies for decades, and he's in his 70s now. And I didn't know that existed, right? But it's also really cool to know, like, yeah, that's like where we come from, like people that do really dope stuff and oftentimes have their heads down and they're not on Twitter talking about it or whatever. They're just out there doing the work. And so how can we get more of those stories and those people being able to be part of conversations going forward, whether it's at places like Pitch Black or, The Gathering, or a multitude of other ways that community comes together.
Yeah. Well, that's, I would say even part of my inspiration to start doing this podcast and record these interviews and these talks is that I have an experience of my life and of being a Black man and of moving through the world, and especially my interactions with other Black men that does not match the way I hear other people talk about it. And I'm like, I can't, I'm living my life and I'm sure these things are happening. How can I, how can I make it real? Right. So how can I make an attempt to start to capture some of that and then hopefully, get other people to take notice, right? And go like, oh, all right, well maybe, these, like, I've never seen two brothers talk about this and that. I'm like, I just literally got done talking to another dude, like just now. Yeah. All right, let me. So no, like, you know what I mean? That ethos, but I think the the powerful thing about all the different tools that we have technology wise now is you can. But one, in the past, you could have done it via other means, right? Via letters or phone calls, whatnot. Yeah. But also now there's so many different vehicles by which, if you want to build some community with people, you can get a couple of apps in a little bit of time. 10 or 15 people that don't live next to each other can talk to each other, pretty regularly and like see each other and share images or share information but it's still the intent, which is something I think that you spoke to earlier about either just doing it, just jumping in and trying these things, getting something done that's like, shows that you could do it. And then there's then also like kind of learning what other things you need to do, to be effective or to get the outcome that you want.
Well, and also just calling that out, right? I think, one of the things I learned with Pitch Black was, was I doing it for me so that I could get notoriety and people can know that I did it, or was I doing it for the community, right? And that I had to cross that bridge when I started getting negative feedback about it, right? There was people in the Black community that were outraged that I was doing something like Pitch Black without getting their sign off or not doing it the way that they thought it should be done. And I had to sit back and take that feedback and just kind of say, it's okay for me to do it the way that I want to do it. I'm not taking away from somebody else doing something else. I'm seeing it have an impact with the people that I'm supporting, and that's enough for me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that we don't talk about enough is that, if you do put yourself out there, there's going to be haters. There's no matter what. Like you could cure cancer and someone's going to say, well, you should have done it on Thursday instead of Tuesday. Right?
Yeah.
And, if you know that's coming and you have a focus on what success looks like and what the values that you want to uphold while you're doing what you're doing, then that's okay. Like, so and so is going to do their thing. I'm doing my thing. I know what my thing's about. I know what my thing's not about, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But that feedback will come if you put yourself out there. Be ready to get some jabs, get a shank, whatever. It's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think there's a thing that thought that, conflict, if you think about it from like a exercise or fitness perspective, like the hard work, the conflict your quads will have running up a hill
Mm-hmm.
with this activity later make your quads stronger. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Give you more power and energy, but also that, to a sense, I think that the disruption that comes, or the negative feedback that comes. I think something I want to say. Since we did an episode, I recorded something about Kenya Barris's show and Rashida
Mm-hmm.
Jones and them,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and there was something about her before some interview, and he's both like, look, I take the negative. Like, if I want to hear the praise, I want to hear the criticism. You know what I'm saying? With these, me again paraphrasing something I saw on the internet. So I've always been a person that's pretty comfortable, or learned to be comfortable with people giving me critical feedback. It's just, try not to let that critical feedback like stop you, so to speak. I think has at least been my thing.
Yeah, and understanding sometimes when people are giving you critical feedback, that's just them working through their own emotions on something, right? And sometimes it has actually nothing to do with you. And they're spiteful or jealous or one of 1,000 other things, and that's just the way it's manifesting, and that's cool. That's fine, right? But for me, it helps me recenter on, okay, why am I doing this? Am I doing this so that everybody likes me and then I don't get negative feedback? Okay, no, I'm not. I'm doing it because of the community needs to know about the breadth of talented folks that are out there, and we're not hearing those stories, right?
Yeah.
We weren't hearing about people that worked at NASA, and people that raised tens of millions of dollars from our community. We weren't hearing about that before.
Yeah.
And those stories need to be told. They need to be put out there. And so I'm willing to take the brunt of some of the negative feedback in order for those kind of things to be out there, even if it only helps a couple folks, right? Because I got to believe that there's a kid that's living out in Aloha like I was, that's hearing about a guy like Ben Barry, who's got a drone company here in town, who grew up here, it did work for NASA, who drives a DeLorean, that really resonates with this kid out in Aloha, who's like, wow, like it's okay for me to do that. I can be that kid that's really into tech or robotics or whatever, and that doesn't take away from my authentic blackness. And so that's really the point that I'm trying to drive home, is just the broad array of things that we are doing, we can be doing, and we will continue to do in the future, and letting more people know about that. But that's not going to be okay with everybody, right?
Yeah.
Like, some people tell me, like, real black folks out in the numbers, don't appreciate that. And I'm like, I don't know what real black folks are, but okay. This means we have to have a longer conversation.
Yeah.
So.
we gotta dive in and sit with it. And I think a common thing where there's as many ways, to be black as there are black people. I want to cite the source, but I can't remember at the moment, because I've heard a lot of, it's been a constant statement stated, and I think it's something that is important for people to recenter that when we are. And I like that you raised that when someone is giving you that feedback, that they may be also processing and sorting out how they see this situation. And again, I want us to be together. That's one of my things. I like being with folks. I like connecting with people. And even if we are not standing in the same, kind of place in the world in terms of how we see things, I want to give us a chance to, like, well, pretty sure we probably like some things together, or find some things in common, or have some common interests around. And I think for the future that will be, learning how to form your nucleus of people and build your space out, I think is going to be important. Like people got to learn how to get together in a world that it's easy to be, you have to be spread out physically, not just due to what's happening with public health wise, but just even what it costs to live and where you can get to transit or how you can find, so you may not be able to be right next to each other. However, that doesn't mean you have to be disconnected.
And that's really important now, because if you think about the story trajectory of the Black experience in Oregon, it's always been very, very heavy on Black people in Northeast Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And, historically, if the city or the state wanted to know something about Black people, they'd go and find whoever Black ministers over the age of 60 in Northeast Portland, and they would tell them what's important to Black people. As opposed to, now I think we kind of know, like, okay, that's one perspective, but there's been Black folks living all over the state, since the 1800s.
Yeah.
How do we validate their experience? How do we validate their perspective on our state, and what they bring to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, thank you for sharing with me this morning, Stephen.
Always, brother.
Always. I want to say, as I like to say, at least as I say now, I want to save some for later, because I'd like to have you back on, maybe on
anytime,
to talk on some more focused topics. But I want to move us towards a close in this conversation with this, and this is can you share either something, a book, music, movie, something that you either consumed or read or experienced, one way at a later point, an earlier point in your life, that when you look at it now, you sort of feel differently about it? Is there anything, learned wise or whatever that reached you this morning? I didn't prep you for that one, so
no. There's definitely a ton of books that I love reading. I think, especially for the Black community, we're very, very big on stories, and stories that either are told in our families, our tribes, in our communities. And my biggest teacher has always been my father. And I think about back in the mid 80s, there was a group of hikers that went missing on Mount Hood. And I remember coming home from school, and one of my teachers from my school was one of the missing hikers. And I remember coming home from school the day that they went missing, and waiting, and my dad came home from work a little early, and he immediately started packing a duffel bag, and he was going to be leaving. And I was really upset that he was going to be leaving. And at the time, I was upset because that meant I wasn't going to get time with him. And I was the youngest of 5 boys. And so I was always battling for time with him. And he, as he was walking out, I was, upset. And I was like, well, why are you leaving? And he was like, well, the people are missing. And, you can't be found unless someone's looking for you. And so I'm going to go look for them, because that gives them an opportunity of being found. And at the time, I was just upset because I was being selfish and, 11 years old at the time, because I wasn't getting time with him. But, that experience and thinking about, and, some of the people passed away, but a majority of the hikers were found safe. And, that experience just kind of told me the importance of showing up for other folks. Like, even if you don't have all the other answers, like, showing up is really, I always say, like 80% of the battle. And if you want better for other people, what are you willing to do to put in on that, right? Yeah. And on that day, that was my dad's way of putting in on it, was just going to look for people.
Yeah.
And that's the input he could do. And so I try and, learn from that and kind of model from that. Like, what am I willing to do? What are others willing to do for other people to be found? And in whatever that means. Maybe that's just their version of being found is just being seen, right? Because I think for a lot of people in our community, they don't feel seen, especially young folks.
Yeah.
And so, that was the thing I learned. Like, if people want to get found, somebody's got to be looking for them.
Indeed.
Who are you looking for?
Indeed. Oh, Stephen, thank you for sharing all that this time with me today, and that, of course, I think is perfect place to pause and break this conversation for today. Anything you want to say just for the good of the order, good of the universe before I let us go?
Man, shout out to all the people, all the frontline folks that have been helping out with COVID. Appreciate you, love you. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Looking forward to getting the crew back together for the gathering, in whatever form that exists. And also, continuing to push forward for a better experience for the Black community here in Portland. So I thank you for opportunities like this for us to tell our stories.
Thank you for listening to the Ask Your Oldhead Podcast with Justice Rajee. Thank you to my guest, Stephen Green. Just so you know, for context purposes, this episode was recorded, a little earlier on in this state, in this moment where we're at in our community and in our country and in the world, from the global pandemic to the realities that are playing out in the streets and in our places as we folks are asserting their rights and looking for change and substantive long-term change in what we're building. So thank you again to Stephen for adding on with me. Please find me on the internet. I will have all of the notes and everything in the show notes where you can keep up with what Stephen's doing, keep up with what the podcast is doing. As we move through the summertime, man, take care of your family, take care of the ones you love, and be safe. Peace.